So my name is David Gibbons, and today I'm going to show you how to webpack your Django. So a brief bit about myself. I am a many-time PyCon Ireland attendee, and I've many colored T-shirts at this stage. And I've learned a lot over the years, so this is my first time speaking, and I'm thankful to Python Ireland for the opportunity. I've been working with Python and also JavaScript for over 7 years. I'm a software engineer at OpenApp, where we create bespoke web applications. And day to day, I do server and client-side web development. We use Postgres, Django, JavaScript, and HTML, CSS. I'm on Twitter at davgibbs, where I'll post the slides, and I am on GitHub at the same handle, where I'll post any code from this talk. So a brief bit about OpenApp. It's a software development company which is based in Dublin City Centre, founded in 2002. We currently have 45 staff employed. We do web applications for industries, mostly the healthcare industry and postal, and two of the focuses we have are on patient registries and health data analytics. We're always interested in interesting CVs. Software engineers, project managers, QA, test automation, etc. So if you're interested, talk to me after about working at OpenApp, and also you can then send a CV to HR at OpenApp if you're interested after that. So about a year ago, I was lead developer on a recent greenfield project, which was an address cleaning application. So so oftentimes. Companies have large spreadsheets of address information, which can include misspellings or inaccuracies. So what our application does is you upload a spreadsheet. It does matching to a correct, up-to-date addressing information in Ireland, and then you re-download the spreadsheet with the exact information, which can save time for deliveries and other logistical stuff like that. When we started, decided on Vue.js and Webpack, which was the origin of this talk, and it's been quite successful for us over the last year. So I thought I'd share the knowledge of what we've done. The techniques we use is not exactly about that project, but it's the same techniques used. So about this talk, we're going to go through it in 4 sections. Firstly, introduce Django without Webpack. So set it up as per documentation, how you might get a Django project up and running, but before going near Webpack. Then we'll introduce Webpack. Thirdly, integrate Webpack into Django. And lastly, once the setup is in place, it's quite nice, quite easy to add Webpack extras. So we'll look at that as well. So the talk goals, basically 2. Firstly, I know there's a lot of tools in the JavaScript world, a lot of new frameworks, etc. And you could spend your whole life learning new frameworks, but I think Webpack is one of the ones that's worth learning, and it can help improve your application. It's also straightforward to incorporate into Django. I'll show a simple architecture, which means it's pretty similar for local development and for production, and it's worked quite well. So here we have the Django mascot. It's a pony with magical powers. This pony can fly. But in this talk, we're going to we're going to put one more. We're going to put a Webpack jetpack on top of the pony. So this will help the pony that's already magical fly even higher and faster and become even more powerful with Webpack and Django working together. So we'll start into the first section. So Django, along with Flask, are the 2 most popular web frameworks in Python. And Django would be more of a batteries included approach. It's a high-level Python web framework. It encourages rapid development and clean, pragmatic design. And it follows the MVC, Model View Controller, architectural pattern. in Django's case, it's MTV, which is Model Template View Architecture. So the models define what is created in the database, then the templates have the presentation logic, and the views contain all the business logic. For the talk today, we'll mostly be focusing on Django static, which is JavaScript CSS images, which is referenced inside the HTML templates. To illustrate the points made, we're going to create an example application, and as the theme for Python Ireland 2019 is the environment, we're going to create a Django API, which serves a random environment-related quote, and then our front end is then going to display that quote and the corresponding author. So this is the setup. We have a front end directory, which has our CSS, images, JavaScript. And then, as with the normal Python project, we're defining models and views, which then set up an API. And inside environment.json is a list of fixtures, which is the list of quotes, which we can then load into the database to get us started initially. The index.html, of course, references the front end, so reference the front end files. And we're using npm and to manage the dependencies, which is the dependencies are put into package.json. So in terms of the models, it's quite simple. It's a setup. In Django, you create a model, which then corresponds to a database table, and then inside the model, the fields are fields inside the database table then. So we have text and author. The fixture file, environment.json, has got a list of quotes, such as this one. The earth is what we all have in common by Wendell Berry. And these are then loaded, as I said, into the database. Oops, too fast. And this is the view. So in Django has quite a nice method which will order order the models from the database by random, which is this question mark, and then we take the first one. So it's just going to give us a random quote from the database and then convert it into a model to dict and then return it as a JSON. That's all that it does. It's an API set up returning JSON. So we had models and views, and lastly we have templates. So this is broken into 3 slides, just so you can process it a bit easier. At the top we have CSS imports using Bootstrap and styles, custom styles inside styles.css. And down the bottom we have Vue. We're using the Vue framework in this example, and a JavaScript.js, which basically just does the query to the API and then returns it. Oops. Sorry. One back. We have an image at the top, and then the title, a header. And then in here we have the variables, the 2 Vue.js variables, which is quote text and quote author. And then we have a button at the bottom then, which just gets the next quote. So in terms of what that HTML translates into on a web browser, it's just this web page with an image, a title or a header. Inside here, it displays the quotes and then a button. So if I click next, I get the next quote is populated inside from the API. So example, a new quote comes up, and this is what this application does. So this is fantastic. We have everything set up, web applications being served. It's all working perfectly. Why? And someone tells Winnie the Pooh that you should be using Webpack. And Winnie the Pooh is pretty confused because he doesn't know what benefits this is going to give him to go looking at a new tool. So there's many potential benefits, but 4 I've identified that we're missing in the current application, what we possibly be able to get with Webpack. At the moment, our JavaScript code is not minified, and any comments are not removed. So this is inefficient with downloading white space into the browser, which isn't necessary. So it'd be nice to minify JavaScript. There's no unique file names on the static resources, so the browser can get caught. So we have one version which is script.js, and then we change script.js, but the browser is unaware and it's using the old cached file. So we want to be able to version our JavaScript files using a unique hash in the file names. On development, then, if I make a change, if I change the image or if I change something in the application, I then have to go back to the browser, click refresh in the top left, and then I see the change. It would be nice if it would, just as the change is made, it comes back into the browser, automatically updates, and it will save time with that. You don't need to keep refreshing and that. And it will retain state as well, so even it'll just change the parts of the web page which are not, which have changed, not everything. And finally, code splitting, which I'll come to near the end, is also something that would be nice to have. Oops. So enter Webpack. So Webpack is a static module bundler for modern JavaScript. Initially released in 2012, it's currently version 4. As an engineering manager at Instagram, gave a really good talk. I'd recommend it on YouTube at OSCON 2014 on how Instagram use Webpack to bundle their React application. And in terms of what I like about it, it's quite nice. It's quite easy to add functionality. It's modular. If you need something, you can look it up and add it. And then if you no longer need it, it's quite easy to remove it. And according to one of the co-creators of Django, Jacob Kaplan-Moss, at a talk earlier this year, it's the best asset manager at the moment, currently. So like other JavaScript packages, we just install it through npm. So we install Webpack, and then the Webpack CLI, which is needed as of version 4. Have to install Webpack CLI with it. So config.json, or Webpack.config.js, it contains all the information. It's the sort of the brain of Webpack configuration. And it contains your specific needs. So if your application is a React application, you configure your Webpack config in one way. If it's a Vue, you configure it slightly differently. And then in other changes also go into Webpack config. And as we'll see, we'll go through these five. There's 5 key concepts in Webpack, which is mode, input, output, and then plugins and loaders if they're being used. So this is probably the best graph to explain what Webpack does. It bundles modules with dependencies into files for the browser. So on the left, we have an entry point, a starting point, JavaScript file here, which has dependencies on all of these files. And Webpack, you kind of put these all into Webpack, and Webpack spits out files that the browser can understand, such as JavaScript, CSS, JPEG. So that's essentially sort of a pipeline that Webpack runs through. It's called a build. So in terms of the 5 core concepts, mode is development or production, and this is quite nice because it enables built-in optimizations. For example, if you are in production mode, it'll minify your JavaScript. If you're not, it won't minify. If you're in development, it'll leave it as it is. Entry, this is the starting point for Webpack. So this you can have one entry point, or it can be multiple entry points. In this case, we just have one, which we'll store inside the front-end directory in a file called index.js. So if we go back to this graph, that will be in our case, this will be index.js. This is the starting point where Webpack builds module trees from, or dependency trees on top of. And then the output files. So these are the files at the end, the JavaScript, CSS. So we need to tell Webpack what to call these files and also where to place them. So we give it file name, which is the name, and then the hash, which we'll use as the version control. Then we're going to place them inside a dist folder, distribution folder, which is common in JavaScript. And we also need the path, public path, which will tell us where to find images, etc. And then last two on the core concepts is plugins and loaders. So plugins are used for a wide range of tasks, such as asset management. In this case here, we're going to just use a Vue loader plugin because our application is a Vue.js application. And then loaders. So out of the box, Webpack only understands JavaScript and JSON. Loaders have the ability, give Webpack the ability to be extended, so it can understand all sorts of file types. So what we're saying here is if it's a CSS file, we're going to do a combination of style loader and CSS loader. If it's a Vue file, use the Vue loader. And if it's an image, a PNG or a JPEG, we're going to use the file loader for that. So so putting it together, we just have our initial three mode entry output at the top. We have the plugins listed and the loaders listed. And any additional requires we can put in at the top. If we want to use more plugins, we slot them in here into the list. And then if we want to use different loaders, we can add them to our loaders list here at the bottom. So I've tried to keep this talk as generic as possible, so it's not specifically for one framework. But one thing I'd like to mention is that it's for Vue.js code, Webpack gives the benefit of allowing you to use single file components, which are really useful as the project expands, because it isolates a component. You can have HTML, JavaScript, and CSS in the one file, so you can create a button.vue file or a stepper.vue file or something like that, and then you can reuse that component in different parts of your application. And of course, then the index.js is the entry point to the app in our case. So I said it'll start the package JSON. Its biggest job is to maintain dependencies in JavaScript, but there's also a useful script section where we're going to add a build command for Webpack. And this is going to use the default config Webpack.config.js. And this is how you run Webpack. This is how you run the build command. So on my local machine, if I then run, it's a sort of a shorthand, so you can add all sorts of configuration options in here if you want, and then you'll just still have to keep running npm run build. It's a nice, neat way of doing it. So when I run that, all the different files are taken into Webpack, and Webpack produces two files, just in this case. The image file, which is that earth with the tree on top of it, and then the bundle file, which is an app file, which contains all the JavaScript and CSS, and it also tells the entry point of this application. And also gives the sizes. One thing I've definitely noticed with Webpack, you become a lot more aware of the size of the files you're asking the browser to download. It gives you prompts if your files get too large, and it tries to give you the minimal amount to download to the browser, so it's not bloated code. Okay, so of our 4 missing requirements, the top 2 are sort of fixed now. Because we're using mode production, the JavaScript is being minified and comments removed, and also because of the file names had on the last file, this big long hash string, we're getting versioning on that as well. So those two, so the browser will know when the file is changed, file content is changed. So, but it's still not. Webpack is not talking to Django. Webpack is doing its thing, but Django isn't aware of the file names that Webpack is generating, the bundle file names. So the next step is to integrate into Django Webpack, and this is quite This is something that I struggled with at the start a little bit because you've got great documentation for Webpack, great documentation for Django, but it's how do you make them talk? How do you make them communicate? And this is where this library called django-webpack-loader comes in, which I found like the secret sauce of making the two Webpack and Django work well together. It says in the library tagline that it's transparently use Webpack with Django, and that's pretty much what it does. And also in the documentation, there's a line, one of the core principles of Django Webpack-loader is not to manage Webpack itself in order to give you flexibility to run Webpack the way you want. So you configure Webpack as you want, and then Django will just pick up the changes as at the end. And it does this through a meta file. So a Webpack plugin will watch as Webpack runs the build, output this metadata file, and that will tell Django what the file names are that have been produced by Webpack, so then Django can use it inside the template. So there's two steps to use this library. You've got to install a package on JavaScript side and install a package on the Python side. On the JavaScript side, it's just these two lines. You've npm install, same as before, of many packages in JavaScript world, and then add a bundle tracker inside Webpack-config. So on each build, this bundle tracker will see what files that are produced and then put it inside a Webpack stats.json file, which is just a metadata file, which you never really need to open. It just sits there, and then Django can read that file. And then on the Django side, also need to install a package, which is called Django-webpack-loader. And then it's just two steps inside the Django settings file. You need to just add a Webpack-loader inside install apps, and then add this section on the Webpack-loader to tell Django where to look for the bundle. So it tells Django to look inside the dist directory, and then also that the file name is going to be Webpack-stats.json. So you can, of course, change this file name to something you want, but you just need to change it on the Django side and on the JavaScript side. And this lastly means that we can then use render bundle rather than static in the template tag. So render bundle will look inside this file and use the static files that have been generated rather than the non-generated ones.
Like when you're like deploying like static in production, usually you would kind of have it located somewhere else. Like this sounds like you're going to use like static in the Django.
Yeah, it is. To be fair, it is. Yes. So the question was that we're using static in the Django sense rather than static placed somewhere else. Yeah. Like Apache, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that is true. That is a concern. For our application, it's worked fine. There hasn't been any problems using Django with static that way. Potentially, as it grows, it can be an issue, but with the speed or something like that. But it's not been an issue. We're using static the way Django has it in the documentations as such. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So with those two steps, we've integrated Django and Webpack. So the first step is npm run build, creates the bundles into this dist directory with the Webpack stats, contains the file names, and then Django run server. On development, the Django run server will run, and then it will include the bundle files inside Webpack. So the two Webpack and Django can then talk to each other. So we've got Webpack integrated, and we haven't done a huge amount in terms of our directory structure. So in yellow, I have the files that are generated by Webpack. So these aren't part of source code or anything like that. These are just, each time this will be different. So we've got a new dist directory, which contains those files. And then also down here, we've got the Webpack stats files in yellow as well, which is just metadata that keeps getting changed on every build. In here, we've merged styles and JavaScript into app.vue, which is the single file component I was talking about, and then an entry point. That's what's happening there. We've updated index.html, the only change there really is that we are using the render bundle rather than the static template tag at this point. And then, of course, lastly, we've added the file Webpack.config.js, which is the brain of Webpack, which tells Webpack exactly what to do. So that's been added there as well at the bottom. Okay, so on our list of 4 ticks, we've gotten 2. We've got, as we set the mode to production, we've got minified JavaScript, and then we've included the file, a unique hash in each file name. But we're still missing the last 2, which on our development, it's not being refreshed. If you make a change, and the code splitting thing we haven't looked at that yet at all either. So as I was saying, there was a bit of work to get Webpack and Django talking together, but once that's in place, it's actually quite easy to add additional functionality to Webpack. And there's ESLint you can run before the Webpack bundle, which will alert you to linting errors in JavaScript quickly, so you won't have to run later. It'll show up immediately because the build will not build. It'll throw an error during the build. So I recommend adding that. Babel, which will translate your. If you want to use the latest JavaScript, it will convert it back into older versions of JavaScript, so that old versions of IE or Internet Explorer will be able to pick them up if you need to support browsers like that. There's a plugin that cleans the old bundles, which I use, you only need the latest version of the bundle, so it just wipes everything else that's in that directory and just uses the latest ones. And there's another bundle analyzer plugin, which gives you a graphical interface of your bundle, so we can help identify packages that aren't needed, and you can delete them from your bundle. But in terms of getting our 2 extra ticks on our 4 missing requirements, the added extras we want to add are Webpack-dev-server, and then we want to add in the code splitting. So the Webpack-dev-server is really useful for development. On any code change, on the save, if you save a source file to the file system, it'll rebuild and update the browser display for quicker development. So you don't need to do that. Click the top left refresh button. It'll basically watch for changes, update by itself. And the way I run it, I have Webpack-dev-server, which is an Express Node.js server. It runs in one terminal tab. It's a Django development server in another. And any changes from the dev server can then update on screen. So to add in the Webpack-dev-server, all we need are these. We need to add the Webpack-dev-server itself, and then Webpack merge, which is a useful package. So it takes all of the config, the Webpack.config.js files, and it just overwrites anything it overwrites any changes that you have in a different file. I'll show it in the dev config now in a second. And we also want to add up above, you might remember, we added a build command, which just runs Webpack build. We want to add a second command now, which is Webpack-dev-server, and it takes in all the config inside Webpack-dev.js, which is on this next slide. So we have this top bit is just about taking the config from the base configuration, the common configuration, and then overriding it. So any settings inside here we're just overriding, but otherwise using the common configuration. So we'll overwrite mode, which we had before as production. Now I want to set it to development. We overwrite the output, so we'll have it on a public path, which is where the files will be placed. It's no longer inside a path, but it's on this server, this dev server. And finally, I want to set the dev server port to 3000 and hot reload, which is the bit that doesn't refresh the whole page, but only refreshes the part of the pages that you actually have made changes for. And this last one is necessary because we have our Django development server running on port 8000, and then we have our Webpack-dev-server running on port 3000, so there can be access control issues in the browser. It doesn't let you access a different origin, so we have to just set access control origin to anything. Okay, so that's the dev server setup, and then our last tick is to add in code splitting. And this, to be fair, isn't probably necessary in our application because it's quite small, but it's a really powerful Webpack feature. So it lets you split code into bundles, so it can be loaded on demand or in parallel. So this will cut down on the initial page load time. So we have two options. So imagine I have the app which has serves the random environment quote, but if I want to make a second admin app at a different entry point, which lets me, for example, add new quotes, I'll have two entry points here. I can put all the code and it'll be downloaded each time to this one, or it'll be downloaded to this one. But this is pretty inefficient because we don't need some of the code here. We only need the code that's applicable to app for app and admin app for the admin app stuff. So code splitting is done on the right, so it lets app code be separate from admin app code, and then the shared code then can sit in the middle. So the Vue.js and the Bootstrap stuff that's used by both this and this can then be downloaded as needed. And if you're in app and move to admin app, you won't re-download the shared code. It's already in the browser. So this is the last piece on the code splitting. So we prevent duplication by separating out vendor code, Vue.js, Bootstrap. And there's a setting in that also goes into Webpack.config.js for optimization, and it will basically test, is the file loaded inside node modules? If it is, make it into a separate chunk, into a separate bundle called vendor, which is a different, we have app, and then we'll have two bundles. We'll have app and we'll have vendor. And then we also need to just make sure we add in the render bundle call in the template for the vendor bundle on top of the app bundle. Okay, so with that, we've 4 ticks. We've added in the Webpack-dev-server, so we're watching our source files. We've optimization, so when we expand our application, we're not repeating, we're not downloading code that's not necessary, and we're reusing code as we change app. So with that, Winnie the Pooh is delighted. He's not confused about Webpack anymore. He's smiley. And so that's just me just finished. Just as a summary, Webpack is a tool, modern JavaScript development. It handles different file types to produce bundles. So as we saw, it can take CSS, images, all sorts of different Vue files, and produces bundles from that. In this talk, we had an example application which used Webpack to bundle static files, and then we made use of this really nice library that I find really nice called django-webpack-loader. As I said, once the basic Webpack configuration is in place, it's quite easy to add. That's the hard work done. You can then, like a kid in a candy store, you can go and let around and look at different Webpack configuration and see what you can make use of in your own application. And this is a tried and tested way to Webpack your Django. So we've been using this for almost a year, and it's sort of just sitting there. It's really easy to update our application, and it's been really nice to work with. And we can focus on business logic rather than this architecture of trying to make Webpack and Django work together. So it's worked quite well. So thank you very much for listening, and if there's any questions, please ask now. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you.
Can I ask people to use the mic if they have a question?
Hey, thanks for the talk. It was great. I wonder, is there any package to integrate Webpack-dev-server with the Django run server? So you just have, you just run one thing, and maybe it hooks into it and just kind of runs it side by side. Is that a feature of Webpack-loader?
No, I don't think it is. Yeah, I mean, it could. It's nice to kind of see both of them side by side, because when I say the two terminals, you can kind of see what Webpack's doing, you can see what Django's doing. If they were outputting the same messages, like messages in one log, it wouldn't be sure what Django's doing and what Webpack's doing. I kind of like them being separate, so you can, if there's any ever issues, you can debug it, and you know where the problem is. But yeah, it's certainly an idea just to run one command rather than the two commands side by side. But I don't know of any package that does that anyway, no.
Sure, thanks.
Anybody else? Did you have a question? Well, if there are no more questions, thank you very much, David.
Thank you. Thank you.